is what are your tips for a new brewer? Somebody who's just starting off on home brewing. What is the best advice you can give to them?
Fermentation control.
Yes.
Fermentation temperature. One thing I learned very early on is anybody can make sugar.
Yep.
Any monkey can make wort. And yeah, you need some background, whether it's reading books or talking to brewers to come up with a good recipe. But when it comes to fermentation, that will either save your beer or kill your beer. And you want to make sure that you have a firm control on fermentation control, whether that's in a fridge with a fermentation, with a temp control. But I truly believe that fermenting your beer in a closet,
just letting it go.
Maybe
if you're using Quebec yeast, great. But yeah, like I totally agree. Brewers make wort, yeast make beer. So yeah, make sure they're in a happy working environment.
Exactly. And to your point, I've always said that brewers are just yeast ranchers.
Yep.
We just make food for yeast.
Yeah,
the yeast makes the beer.
Control is the best.
Fresh ingredients, always malt, whatever, that could be in its own, but try using fresher hops. That's a night and day difference. Yeast health, rather than just pitching it straight out of a vial, doing a starter is again also a night and day difference. 90% of beer flavor comes from yeast fermentation. So if your yeast isn't stoked, isn't healthy, isn't happy, then that's gonna show through in your beer too. So so healthy yeast, good fermentation, fresh ingredients, and give it the time it needs.
Patience.
And you're pretty much you'll be pretty golden with those few things.
So it's interesting because there's two different sides of that. Number one, there's the side of me that wants to be like young, naive Andrew. You need to be a lot more meticulous, make sure fermentation temp is correct, make sure everything's as sanitary as possible, make sure you're taking as much gravity readings as possible, making sure you're as consistent as possible, because I've become this head brewer that is so focused on making sure we have a consistent product for customers because we're shipping all over the world and it's so important. But there's also the flip side of that where the priority that I feel like that's so important as a home brewer is it's a hobby. It's all about having fun. So it's kind of a duality there. Making sure that you're trying to dial things in, make sure the most important things are obviously fermentation, pitching the right healthy yeasts, making sure you're checking the gravity, adding the right amount of oxygen, etc. But then also just focusing on the fun side of things, brewing weird beers, adding fun new hops, adding new yeast strains, doing things that keep you excited. That's what homebrewing's about, hanging out with your friends, drinking beers, learning something new. I mean, it's one of those interesting hobbies that you don't really get to do in most other hobbies, where you just get to hang out, make something fun that you get to drink at the end of it. Is there anything else that you can do like that? I don't think so.
Yeah, it in my opinion, it is the best hobby in the world, right?
Yes.
Keep it clean.
Okay.
Sanitation. That's the big thing, right? Is we don't realize how clean things need to be, until you start, you're in the beer world, and then you're just because a hose looks kind of clear,
visually clean,
doesn't mean that it's clean. So when you read a homebrew book and it says, hey, use whether it's PBW caustic or use some sort of caustic followed by a sanitizer like a Star San sanitizer, don't skip those steps.
Yeah.
they're there for a reason. You may, when you buy new hoses and gaskets or whatever, that first batch may be good, but batch 2 is just a train wreck, and I mean that's definitely happened to me as well. And at that point, it's better to either just buy new hoses and then just say okay, that's the penalty for not following your kind of cleaning procedures to a T, because that's going to make the difference between 3 weeks of waiting and your beer's good, or 3 weeks of waiting and your beer tastes like Band-Aids.
Yep. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. I would say if I were to the thing I feel like you taste in homebrew a lot is under attenuation. Mm-hmm. And what that stems from could be 1,000 things, but a very easy fix, or not a Band-Aid and maybe more, would be make sure you overpitch your yeast. If you're starting out and you go buy a homebrew kit and it comes with one packet of dry yeast, just buy another one.
Yeah.
They're not that expensive, and
Or learn how to do a starter.
or learn how to do a starter. But if you're not even there yet, don't expect one vial to ferment. Get 2 vials, get 2 pouches, get 2 dry packets. Just you'll be surprised how much better your beer will be because you're throwing in the proper amount of yeast.
Probably get your packaging under control. So from your carboy, let's say you're using a carboy, to your tank, do your research and your reading on it to keeping your dissolved oxygen levels as minimal as possible. Because I find that's where most of the homebrews we try that have gone bad, it's in that process right there.
So I'm going to ask you a question. Would you recommend racking to a secondary?
No, God no. That's just more oxygen pickup.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
think
I think a lot of the classic tips or books even say that rack to secondary. And like that's
just to get you off the yeast from autolysis. But at this point, it's spread out so far, and most homebrewers use a fresh pitch.
Yeah.
So when that yeast is that healthy, it's like you're not. I mean, unless it's going to sit on there for 6 months.
and it's only 5 gallons as opposed to 20 barrels, so that the head pressure on that yeast is not, which helps speed up the autolysis. So it's not as important as important the commercial side, but not as important on the home side.
And then we dry hop the fuck out of it too, right? So your hops will just cover up that yeast.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I would really focus on trying to get that transfer process figured out. You can read it. I'm sure there's plenty of YouTube videos these days, but there's a whole way to just transfer it with zero oxygen. Just use CO2 to push from carboy to your serving keg, and then carbonate your keg to whatever you're stuff. But to me that's probably one of the big ones. I wouldn't worry so much about recipe development until you have fermentation and packaging under control, because your recipes don't fucking matter. And another one, keep your malts fucking simple. Like
KISS.
Don't make a beer with 10 malts in it. Like IPA should have 2 malts. When you start getting crazy like that, everything just gets bundled up in malts. There's some beers, like crazy stouts and things like that. Sure, you can throw this, and this, but for the most part, man, like 3 malts, that's all you need. Tasty actually gave me that advice back in the day, and I took it to heart, and it's so right, because it's kind of the same thing. It's like we try and keep all our beers at 3 hops and 3 malts. Every now and then with a hazy, we'll throw in like a 4th hop just to kind of get a cool little blend, but 3 and 3, that's like our magic number, or less. But keep it simple, stupid. That's it's
a good one.
Seriously, man, you can get too crazy and too involved into it, and it just takes away.